The Middle East has always been a region of layered complexity. Ancient history, religious tensions, colonial aftermath, and resource-driven geopolitics have shaped its every fault line. But among all the rivalries in this region, few have become as entrenched, as strategically dangerous, and as globally impactful as the ongoing standoff between Israel and Iran. This isn't just about politics or religion. It's a multidimensional conflict spanning nuclear ambitions, espionage, proxy militias, cyber warfare, and quiet battles fought in the shadows. Over the past 2 decades, tensions between the two nations have gone from whispered threats to assassinations to airstrikes, and now to what many fear could erupt into a regional war. In this documentary, we'll take a calm, in-depth look at the roots of the Israel-Iran conflict. We'll trace how once cooperative nations became bitter enemies. We'll explore their nuclear race, proxy battles, and the role of foreign powers that continue to shape their rivalry. And finally, we'll ask the question many are afraid to say out loud. Are we already on the path to open war between Israel and Iran? It might come as a surprise that Israel and Iran were once allies. In the decades following the creation of Israel in 1948, Iran, under the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was among the few Muslim-majority nations that didn't overtly reject Israel's existence. In fact, the two countries engaged in covert cooperation, particularly during the Cold War. The Shah's Iran, fearful of Arab nationalism and Soviet influence, found common cause with Israel. In the 1960s and 70s, Israel provided agricultural technology, military training, and oil partnerships with Iran. There were even joint intelligence operations coordinated between Mossad and SAVAK, Iran's notorious intelligence service. But all of that changed in 1979, when Ayatollah Khomeini led the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Iran was transformed overnight from a pro-Western monarchy into an anti-Western theocracy. The new Islamic Republic denounced Israel as an illegitimate state. Khomeini declared it a cancerous tumor in the region and made opposition to Zionism a pillar of Iranian foreign policy. The same year, Iran cut all diplomatic ties with Israel and began supporting groups hostile to it. This shift wasn't just ideological, it was strategic. Iran saw itself as the new vanguard of Islamic resistance in the Middle East, positioning itself against both the US and Israel as part of its revolutionary identity. In 1982, Israel invaded southern Lebanon to push back against the PLO, but Iran saw the chaos in Lebanon as an opportunity. They deployed members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, RGC, to the Bekaa Valley and helped establish Hezbollah, a Shia militant group loyal to Tehran. Hezbollah became Iran's most important proxy force. Armed, trained, and funded by Iran, Hezbollah would launch numerous attacks on Israeli forces, including the deadly 1983 bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, which killed 241 American servicemen. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Hezbollah remained a thorn in Israel's side. This wasn't just a Lebanese-Israeli issue anymore. It was Iran projecting power on Israel's northern border. The proxy war had begun. While proxy forces clashed on borders, a more dangerous threat was brewing underground. In the early 2000s, revelations about Iran's nuclear program shook the world. Sites in Natanz and Iraq revealed uranium enrichment facilities far more advanced than expected. Iran insisted its nuclear ambitions were peaceful, but Israel wasn't buying it. For Israel, the idea of a nuclear-armed Iran was unacceptable. In 2008, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert stated that Israel would not tolerate such a threat. By 2010, tensions hit a boiling point. Iranian nuclear scientists began dying under mysterious circumstances. One was assassinated via car bomb in Tehran. Another was shot in broad daylight. Iran blamed the Mossad, and many experts agreed. The shadow war had reached a new level. Then, in 2010, an invisible weapon made history. A sophisticated computer virus called Stuxnet was discovered in Iran's nuclear facilities. It targeted Siemens-controlled centrifuges and caused them to spin out of control, crippling Iran's enrichment process. Stuxnet is widely believed to have been a joint Israeli-American operation, although neither country has officially taken credit. It marked the beginning of cyber warfare as a central battlefield between Iran and Israel. Iran retaliated with its own cyber units, launching attacks on Israeli infrastructure, media sites, and oil companies. The front lines were no longer visible. They were now inside computer networks. In 2011, Syria descended into civil war. Iran, seeing an opportunity, threw its full support behind President Bashar al-Assad. It sent IRGC forces, Hezbollah fighters, and weapons into the conflict. This allowed Iran to establish military footholds in Syria, placing its forces directly next to Israel's northeastern border. For Israel, this was a nightmare scenario. Over the next decade, Israeli warplanes would carry out hundreds of airstrikes against Iranian weapons convoys, missile sites, and IRGC positions across Syria. But despite the strikes, Iran didn't back down. Instead, it entrenched itself deeper, turning Syria into a launchpad for future operations. In 2020, the political landscape shifted again. Several Arab countries, including the UAE and Bahrain, normalized relations with Israel through the Abraham Accords, brokered by the United States. This broke the long-standing Arab consensus to isolate Israel until Palestinian demands were met. Iran viewed the accords as a betrayal by its Arab neighbors. But more importantly, it saw a regional coalition forming. Israel, the Gulf states, and the U.S. united against Iran. This increased Tehran's sense of encirclement and its desire to strike back through unconventional means. Though Hamas is a Sunni group, Iran has long supported it as part of its anti-Israel strategy. In late 2023, a sudden and violent escalation in Gaza caught Israel off guard. Hamas launched an unprecedented number of rockets into Israel, leading to a brutal Israeli response. Behind the scenes, intelligence pointed to Iranian involvement, including funding, weapons, and political coordination. Israel struck Iranian-linked targets in Syria and allegedly stepped up covert operations against Iranian nuclear infrastructure. The retaliation loop grew tighter, the spiral steeper. The world began to ask, are we on the edge of war? In early 2025, tensions exploded further. Iranian officials accused Israel of assassinating a senior IRGC commander near Damascus. Israel did not confirm, but the operation mirrored past Mossad missions. Iran retaliated with cyber attacks on Israeli water and electricity infrastructure. At the same time, Hezbollah launched rocket barges from Lebanon, escalating border clashes. The Israeli military responded with airstrikes near Aleppo and Damascus, targeting arms depots and Iranian officers. Each side now operates on hair-trigger retaliation. The situation no longer feels like preparation for war. It feels like the early stages of one. As we stand here in 2025, the question isn't whether Israel and Iran will go to war. It's whether we're already watching it unfold in slow motion. The hallmarks of traditional warfare, uniformed soldiers, declarations, front lines, don't apply to this conflict. Instead, we see a low-intensity, multi-domain war playing out in real time. Covert assassinations, cyber attacks, airstrikes, and proxy battles, all while both sides publicly deny open war. But make no mistake, this is not peace, and it's certainly not stability. Both nations are locked in a decades-long cycle of provocation and retaliation. Israel sees Iran as an existential threat, a nation that openly calls for its destruction and arms those who seek to carry it out. Iran sees Israel as a regional aggressor and a tool of Western hegemony. There is little common ground between them. But what makes this conflict truly dangerous is its global implications. The United States has long backed Israel with military, intelligence, and diplomatic support. Russia and China, meanwhile, have in varying degrees aligned themselves with Iran's regional ambitions. If open war breaks out, it could easily drag in superpowers. It could disrupt global oil routes, collapse fragile governments in Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria, and spark refugee waves across the region. Even now, as airstrikes light up Syrian skies and cyber attacks hit critical infrastructure, the world seems hesitant to intervene. Perhaps it's fatigue, perhaps it's fear, but this silence, this inaction, is allowing the shadow war to grow louder, more dangerous. And yet, there may still be a narrow path to avoid disaster. Diplomacy, de-escalation, and back-channel talks still occur, quiet efforts to keep the fire from becoming a wildfire. But the longer this conflict festers in the dark, the more likely it is to burst into light. The truth is this: Israel and Iran don't just represent opposing nations. They represent opposing visions of the future of the Middle East, one rooted in secular nationalism and Western alignment, the other built on religious revolution and resistance to the existing order. Until those visions can somehow coexist, until both sides step back from the edge, the Middle East will continue to be haunted by the ghost of a war it cannot afford to lose. And the rest of the world will watch, nervous, unsure, waiting for the next drone strike, missile launch, or headline to push the region past the point of no return. It begins with a single missile, launched from Iranian soil, aimed directly at Tel Aviv. The Israeli Iron Dome intercepts part of the barrage, but not all of it. A missile lands near a densely populated civilian area. Casualties reach the hundreds. Israel's war cabinet declares it an act of war, and for the first time in decades, formally declares open conflict against Iran. Within hours, Israel begins launching long-range strikes deep into Iranian territory. Key infrastructure is hit: nuclear sites, military bases, and even targets in Tehran. The Israeli Defense Forces confirm that Mossad has activated sleeper agents across Iran. It's no longer a shadow war. It's all out in the open now. With Israel under full-scale attack and retaliation escalating, the United States invokes its long-standing security partnership. Aircraft carriers are moved to the Persian Gulf. F-35 squadrons from Qatar and the UAE begin flying defensive patrols over Israeli airspace. The U.S. publicly states its involvement is limited to supporting Israeli defense operations. But within days, American bases in Iraq and Syria are hit by Iranian missiles. U.S. troops suffer casualties, and everything changes. Congress authorizes limited retaliatory strikes against IRGC targets. Suddenly, the United States is not just supporting Israel. It's an active participant in a hot war with Iran. U.S. destroyers fire Tomahawk missiles at Iranian radar sites. B-2 bombers launch from Diego Garcia to take out Iranian missile facilities near Isfahan. Tehran vows revenge and begins reaching out to its most powerful allies. Both China and Russia have maintained strategic ties with Iran for years. They've supplied weapons, technology, and diplomatic cover in the United Nations. But now they face a decision: let the U.S. and Israel crush Iran, or step in. China, whose energy supply depends heavily on Iranian and Gulf oil, issues a warning. Any further aggression against Iran will be considered a threat to Chinese economic security. Russia, meanwhile, moves S-500 missile systems into western Iran and deploys military advisors to assist IRGC air defense units. They claim it's to stabilize the region, but in reality, they're preparing for direct engagement. By week 3 of the conflict, Russian and Chinese warships are conducting joint naval exercises in the Gulf of Oman. A Chinese drone is spotted over Israeli territory. It's intercepted. Israel accuses Beijing of active surveillance in a conflict zone. The line between superpower posturing and direct involvement begins to blur. As the great powers escalate, the rest of the region explodes. Hezbollah launches a full-scale offensive on Israel's northern border. Rocket barges, tunnel invasions, and drone strikes. Hamas reopens fronts from Gaza, while new militias in Iraq and Yemen, funded by Iran, begin attacking U.S. positions. Oil prices spike past $200 per barrel as tankers are sunk in the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia and the UAE prepare for spillover attacks. Egypt mobilizes troops. The region is now a minefield of alliances and grudges. Jordan, caught in the middle, becomes a battleground for espionage and sabotage. Syria, already broken, becomes a proxy battlefield once more. And Turkey, long silent, begins mobilizing on its eastern border, no longer a neutral observer, but a regional wildcard. While missiles fill the skies, another war rages in silence. Cyber attacks cripple electrical grids across Israel, Iran, and the Gulf states. Tehran is plunged into darkness for 3 days. Tel Aviv experiences rolling blackouts that disrupt hospitals, airports, and military operations. Stock markets in New York, Tokyo, and London crash. Banking systems are temporarily paralyzed. AI-generated propaganda floods social media. False flag videos, fake announcements, and panic-inducing footage drive unrest worldwide. China launches digital attacks on American satellites and communications networks. Russia deploys its elite GRU cyber teams to breach defense systems in NATO command centers. What began as a regional war is now reaching into every home with a screen. The war spreads beyond the Middle East. North Korea, emboldened by U.S. distraction, test fires missiles over Japan. Taiwan enters a state of emergency. Pakistan and India increase troop deployments along Kashmir, fearing chaos may ripple into South Asia. In Europe, NATO begins mass mobilization as Russian forces posture along the Baltic states. Meanwhile, anti-war protests erupt globally, and so do cyber-enabled terror attacks in major cities. Bombings in London, Paris, and New York tied to Iranian sleeper cells or sympathetic proxies. This is no longer a war between Israel and Iran. It has become a global realignment of power. A new Cold War. Only this one is heating up fast. As Iran faces the real possibility of defeat, it considers its last card, the nuclear option. Though long denied, intelligence agencies fear Iran possesses at least 1 or 2 functioning nuclear devices. Israel's Iron Dome and Arrow systems aren't built to stop a full strategic nuke. Mossad scrambles to eliminate the threat preemptively. Meanwhile, the U.S. warns of catastrophic retaliation if any nuclear device is deployed. The world watches breathlessly. Markets collapse, diplomats flee, embassies shut down. NATO goes on full alert. China threatens to retaliate if U.S. nukes are used first. And for the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world stands on the brink of mutually assured destruction. While all of this remains speculative, the building blocks for such a nightmare scenario already exist. Tangled alliances, overlapping proxy wars, unresolved nuclear tension, unstable borders, and rival superpowers locked in digital and ideological warfare. The Israel-Iran conflict is no longer just a regional dispute. It's a flashpoint with the power to engulf the globe. One wrong move, one miscalculation, one assassination too far, and the world could find itself spiraling into the most complex and devastating war of the 21st century. The question isn't if the powder keg exists. It's whether someone, somewhere, will be reckless enough to light the match.